House prices in Perth and Western Australia have dropped by 40% since 2009, leaving families at tipping point with mounting debts they can't pay off. Sydney and Melbourne are warned they could be next, but what about here in Auckland? Property Institute CEO Ashley Church joins me now. Ashley, this is quite scary, isn't it? Could this happen here?
Look, could it happen here? Yes. Is it likely to happen here? I think the answer to that's probably no. And the reason for that is because the circumstances that prevailed in Australia and Western Australia which caused that crash were quite specific to that part of the country. They were built on the back of a mining boom. They were built on the back of a single industry. The situation that prevails here in Auckland and indeed in New Zealand is quite different, much more diverse, and so I think the chances of that happening here are much less likely.
So what are the differences between Perth and Auckland then?
Well, so firstly, putting aside the fact that that mining boom was a single industry and that caused a very big increase in population, big increases in wages, and then a big crash when essentially that market died. New Zealand's built on the back at the moment of a pretty sustained economic boom. That's built on the back of tourism, it's built on the back of the primary industry, it's built on the back of some tech innovations, it's built on the back of an educational sector, any one of which could drop away over the next few years. They're all pretty much in boom at the moment with the exception of the dairy industry. But if that were to happen, the combination or the combination of those other industries basically means that the stability of the economy is not necessarily guaranteed, but pretty likely for the foreseeable future.
So you said it could happen in Auckland, so why would that be?
I think you'd have to have a collapse across all of those various different sectors, and as I say, that's unlikely. We have had a fairly significant drop before, back in the early 70s, about 45 years ago, when and there's an irony in this, when the UK decided to enter what in those days was called the Common Market, now the EU, and essentially took away their ability to purchase products from New Zealand. And at the same time, there was a couple of oil shocks which caused petrol prices to go up. We had a dramatic drop in property prices in the order of somewhere around 38%. But since then, and we're keeping in mind that we've been through a couple of, in fact more than a couple, we've been through several economic downturns for a range of different reasons over that period of time. Property prices have continued to go up, stabilise, with a lot of stability in them. So the sorts of factors that would cause a house price drop are pretty dramatic, and even through, as I say, that some downturns over the last 45 years, we've still seen those house prices hold up. So I think pretty unlikely that we would see the sort of drop that they've seen in Western Australia.
Okay, so for people who have maybe borrowed more than they can handle right now, or for people looking at getting onto the housing market, they shouldn't be too concerned about this?
Well, if you're borrowing more than you can handle, you should be concerned about that in any market, whether it's this one or any other market. So people who overcommit themselves obviously need to make sure that they look at those circumstances and deal with them as quickly as they can by trying to fix rates. But in a general sense, in respect of the risk of the Western Australian situation happening here, I think people can be reasonably assured that that particular set of circumstances is unlikely to happen.
Okay, so what does the future of Auckland look like then, just maybe looking 5 years forward?
So a couple of things. Firstly, the driver of house price inflation in Auckland at the moment is demand. We simply don't have enough houses, and that issue, and tinkering around the edges and trying to artificially stop house prices going up is not going to fix that. That issue is not going to be resolved until we build enough houses to actually meet that demand. That's probably going to take 5, possibly even 10 years. So you can expect to see some pressure on house prices continue until that situation is resolved. That will somehow be resolved at some point in the future, though once that happens, house prices will do what they've always done at the end of Auckland and New Zealand property booms, and that is that they will taper off, they'll stay where they are for a period of 5 or 6 years, and then there'll be another boom and they'll take off again.
But are they going to taper off at a price that people aren't going to be able to afford, or?
Well, you could argue they're already at that point, so we're at a point now where there's a large portion of the population that might have been able to buy a house 5 or 6 years ago that can't do so now. Sadly, that situation's only going to get worse, and it's difficult to see how that's going to be resolved because you've got wages and salaries going up at this level and you've got house prices going up at this level. There's a disconnect which is only getting worse. So that's an economic and social issue that somewhere is going to have to be confronted by a government and by the economy. But for now, we can have some comfort at least that the situation is not going to take the sort of turn that's happened, as I say, in Western Australia.
All right, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very welcome.